we have a presentation in cybersecurity, and we're very glad on welcoming Sabas Casas del Río, Mexico Security Manager Director Lead from Accenture, who has a broad experience in running companies in the IT sector. He is currently in charge of leading cybersecurity issues in Accenture. Before his current appointment, he directed the operations in S21Sec, a cybersecurity company, and also because of his strategic vision, during his trajectory, he has started businesses such as FUA Enterprise, LDA, and Quinta Tech. So welcome.
Thank you, Vicky. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Well, we are going to be talking about cybersecurity. The agenda will be rather rapid. We're going to talk a little bit about the state of the art first. What do we need to know about cybersecurity, which can have an impact on us? Then we're going to talk briefly about 5 critical points or keys that we need to take into account regarding cybersecurity for application in our organizations, and some advice on how to do more with this. This phrase is something that we've all heard now, although we haven't all interiorized it yet. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. When are we going to get hit? When are we going to be attacked? There is a very lot of information, a lot of data, and some of it is shown here, taken from a study done worldwide level. The large corporations are attacked with an average cost of $380,000 per incident and about 22 events a year, meaning $8 to $9 million in damage for each of these businesses per year. The world cost of cybersecurity today has reached $6 trillion. This is about 5 times the GDP of Mexico. Mexico has a GDP of 1.2 trillion. The cost of cyber attacks in Mexico is about $10 million. Creating the proportion there with regard to the world is 0.3%. If we look to the GDP information, we've already mentioned $1.2 trillion GDP of Mexico versus 94 trillion at the world level. Mexico contributes about 1.3% of the world GDP. What does this mean? If we compare these two numbers, we find that there's an inconsistency between the contribution of Mexico's GDP and the damage suffered by Mexico from cyber attacks. This leads us to think that these numbers will gradually become closer and we will have more and more attacks. In fact, today, the increase in attacks worldwide is 47% versus 24% in Mexico. In other words, in Mexico, cyber attacks increased year after year by 24%, whereas in the world, they grow at the rate of 47%. Therefore, once again, we think that the attacks in Mexico will gradually become more. If we take the figure of the cost of cybersecurity in Mexico, which I've just mentioned is about 10 billion pesos, we know that about 24 or 25% of those attacks are aimed at the financial sector. That's a lot of money. We're talking about a figure of maybe $2.6 billion, which will be growing at the rate of 24%. Therefore, do the math. If you represent a bank that maybe represents 5%, 10 or 20% of the quota in the market of financial services in Mexico, the proportional impact of the numbers I've just mentioned will be affecting your company. We're talking about, in the best of the cases, 10% will be $50 million in addition to what you have now. So this is something to take into consideration. It's something for us to be aware of, that cybersecurity is on the table of the board of directors and on the table before the CEO, and this is something we all need to be concerned about. What's happening today? Well, the attacks are aimed and they're not fortuitous. In the past, there were massive campaigns of cyber attacks, but now they're being addressed or aimed at companies specifically chosen with specific objectives. We still have low recovery capacity. We've invested a lot in other things, but since we're going to be hit, we need to know what action we're going to take when we get attacked. This requires a little more, we need to make a little more investment in speed of recovery. We also find through statistics that though we invest more, we are not necessarily more efficient in our cyber protection. So we need to select better those services that we apply to our companies, and in that way become more efficient with every dollar or peso that we spend. And lastly, let's not forget fraud. Banks normally have some isolated fraud strategies. There's the traditional fraud on the one hand, and then cyber fraud on the other hand. Now, both types of fraud need to be covered by one single policy or strategy. Why is fraud so important? Because delinquents are looking not only to steal money, but also to steal data. So we need to be very careful about that. The 5 keys in the services that we're going to talk about have been taken from an Accenture report, which we put out every year. We base it and update it on the experiences that we have. We are classified as one of the main players in the security services. We have a lot of experience and very good relations with the players in the first point to deal with is supply chain. We all know of the importance of the supply chain. The supply chain today is one of the preferred targets for attack by organized crime, mainly in companies whose state of maturity in security is very high. In the financial sector, you know that there is a state of maturity worldwide, and many times it's easier to break into the services and the critical infrastructures of the sector, financial sector, through the supply chain. Here's a few examples. WannaCry in 2017, that's far removed from us now, but that was the first ransomware that was spread through a UVP. The impact of breaking into one supplier or business affected all of the companies around it, and it spread worldwide and caused great damage because it was an innovation, it was a novelty, and as far as ransomware attacks. Today we're accustomed to this type of event, but it's still a problem. Much more recently was SolarWinds. We know that's a modernization and a stabilization platform. This was broken into, and they thereby damaged many different companies that were in contact with SolarWinds. So breaking into a company with high security criteria meant breaking into the entire environment around it. There have been many attacks in the sector derived from attacks to the supply chain. They aren't all cyber attacks, and they're not all very well known, but we need to be very careful with this. The criminal's objective here is not just to get access. They want to cause fear. They want to affect the integrity of the systems. They want to steal and extract that information to later make it available to others and even to modify it. Therefore, what can we do in our organizations to take into account these attacks that come from the supply chain? Well, mainly 4 actions, according to our study. We need to restrict privileged access to software that has been developed externally and have strategies, best practices in areas of third-party risk. There's a lot of literature on this. In fact, there's a standard which helps us to have these best practices. We recommend that a good assessment be made and good implementation of those strategies. On the other hand, the display of tools for a detection of anomalies, mainly in areas of the executive director, and to implement NIS because it has a good set of controls for mitigating this type of vulnerability. Second topic, cyber fraud. Cyber fraud is changing the environment of criminal actors. The main reason that cyber fraud is coming in is through email. Email is in use by the masses, especially after the pandemic. What has happened? Employees and workers have gone to work at their homes, and from home, they're accessing financial services from our institutions. Email, on the other hand, has become the most intense channel of communication, both from a cell phone or a laptop, between the employee and his company. So breaking into email means a high probability of gaining credentials to later have access to mobile devices or laptops. So organized crime has focused a lot on attacks through email. What else have they done? They're collaborating and becoming specialized. They collaborate synchronously or asynchronously. Synchronous collaboration means we agree to attack a certain sector so that we do it all together in one day. You take charge of this area, I'll be in charge of another area. I'll make the malware, you design the vectors of attack to be able to break into the customer's systems or our victim systems, and you, the third person, you're specialized in the local market. You tell us how to get the money out and how to penetrate the internal systems. And this is synchronous collaboration, and it's very popular. The other type of collaboration is asynchronous, where somebody is a specialist in a certain type of activity and makes it available to the market. Genesis, for example, is a marketplace where on the dark web where you can buy frauds as a service, which involves a number of techniques, credential theft, information regarding the digital identity of others, of the victims, very useful for committing fraud. So there are new techniques also and processes. Innovation is occurring in this sector. How are they doing it? They're combining malware families, using artificial intelligence and machine learning, especially using SMS. We also need to consider regulations. Last year, the National Defense Authorization Act in the United States includes responsibility of financial services companies regarding fraud committed against the account holders or those served by the financial institution. So considering this scenario, we need to act. What do we need to do? Well, awareness among our employees as far as phishing and fraud. Then we need to strengthen our anti-phishing strategies. We need to focus on those employees who have access to very sensitive information. We need to avoid access or limit access to critical systems. And we need to look for alternatives to SMS as double reinforcement. Third key point is insiders. Some statistics tell us that 60% of fraudulent external players are guilty of negligence. 25% are internal criminals, and the other 50% is internal identity theft, or credential theft. We have different types of internal players who help criminals, one way or another, to have access to our information. In addition, our employees want greater comfort as they work. They want to have access to all the critical systems in a comfortable manner. I'll give you an example. A worker last year in Russia confirmed that he had sold access to credentials database to about 5,000 people. A Tesla worker informed the authorities that he had been contacted and offered $1 million to create an internal campaign in Tesla for 3 different attack vectors. One was extortion through DOS, and another one was diffusion of malware or ransomware. Numerous articles and cases have been published of telecom companies that are selling cards to the organized crime, which will allow them to take control of cell phones. This is happening more and more. What do we need to do? We need to establish policies regarding privileged access in our companies. We need to reinforce passwords, and we need to revoke access to those persons or roles who should not have access to physical systems, and we should avoid the use of USBs. We should increase our intelligence services to try to discover which players in our organization have privileged information. And we need to have our internal employees to become familiarized with organized crime campaigns. Fourth, ransomware. We've talked a lot about ransomware. There are different types. I overlooked mentioning at the beginning that in the financial sector, half of the year of 2021, the ransomware attacks on this sector increased by 80%. This is a very radical increase of this type of attack. New types of ransomware are being created. Some of them filter information, they encrypt it. Then a company comes along to help, and that's where the social engineering culminates, to break into all those systems that they had not been able to break into before. There are what they call cruel options, which mean that these companies publish on sites that are growing. They publish that they have been attacked so that other companies, other cybercrime companies, can attack directly the top executives of these companies and thus be able to do a specially focused extortion to seek to avoid that, to attack not only the company itself, but also the top executives. GDPR in Europe is strongly recommending the penalization of banks in the case of bad practices in the use of ransomware. What do we need to do here? We need to, in terms of prevention and prediction and action, to assume roles of security, specialized implementation of tools. We need to coordinate well with the various departments and have a very good response to incidents. Lastly, and very quickly, the future of cyber threats mainly focus on 2 great trends. We need to consider quantum computing and biometrics. Quantum computing is being used mainly to decipher codes. These codes, for example, there are data that say that the RCA code would take years normally to decrypt on a conventional server or computer. Today, with quantum computing, it can be done in 1 day. We need to be very much aware of the trends through post-quantum cryptography, which will will post best practices. But until then, we need to use multiple cryptography strategies to change the way in which our data is stored. And then we have the new generation devices. There is a lot of theft through applications and social engineering, the theft of biometric data of individuals. And once this is accomplished, then there's a very great threat to the security of the company. Are you ready for resilience? Some very quick tips. First, know your operations very well. The Department of Security needs to be very well acquainted with the operations of the company. What for? To know what the value chain is. The risk model applied in a company should take into account those critical systems or critical processes in the value chain and strengthen defenses. The entire system of cybersecurity needs to be applied to persons, processes, and technology. We need to have clear communication. We get the board together, communicate to them the importance of defense strategy. We need to be agile in what we do. Go to the cloud and use managed security systems. We need to work proactively, both internally and externally. Internal collaboration is fundamental, and external collaboration is important for us to have a clear picture at all times of what is going on. And lastly, we need to increase the resilience of the business. And then, in closing, some recommendations based on the more technical departments. Take really good care of your architectures of identity digital. Have really good strategies for awareness campaigns, and have a good business continuity program. Have a good incident response and crisis management team, and apply security by design, especially with any contracting that you do with cloud services. Be aware of the need for international compliance with the new rules coming out of the US and Europe. And lastly, pay very close attention to third-party risks. That's all. Thank you very much, and I'm open to questions.
Well, I trust you have enjoyed the presentation. We do have a number of questions here. Someone is asking if attacks are focused more on data or on money, and what makes that possible. Well, actually, the trend in information theft over money theft is caused by one factor, and it's just that it's easier. Financial institutions are protecting their critical assets more and more, which is money, basically. And of course, they don't find that they're not placing quite as much attention on protecting information. But organized crime knows that with information, they can also get money, not only by selling the information, but they can sell it to other companies, or publish it to hurt the organization. What should be done then? Well, you would need to know very well where your sensitive information is and protect it. Protect it with strategies of loss prevention. There are very good practices and technologies even that focus on protecting structured and non-structured data at rest and data in motion and so on. There's another question, how to assess the supply chain to prevent an attack? Well, there are standards and practices. There is a section in one of the ISO standards dealing with this specifically. There are controls such as NIST and very highly specialized programs known as third-party management, which is the risk management done by outside entities, and they are focused on protecting company against supply chain attacks. There's another question which I like here, which is how can we get ahead of cyber attacks? Well, getting ahead of cyber attacks is almost impossible. I might just as well say it is impossible. We can prepare, and there are many ways to prepare. Some of the main methods that we always recommend are we need to have good visibility as to what the company is doing and involved in. This comes through many different techniques, SOC, headhunting, and so on. But we do need to have good visibility and minimize the shadow IT, which often comes into our businesses through servers or computers that are not really under our control or visibility. We need to have very good incident response teams who are highly prepared, not only technically, but also in terms of communication, what is called crisis management. And it's very important to have intelligence services to know what is happening outside. What do people know outside the company about us? There's a lot of information that's in circulation. It can be filtered by inside and outside personnel. So these are some of the recommendations that I would give when it comes to trying to protect our information. We need to know how to spend. It's good to have a budget, but we also need to know how to use it. And we should invest in making our systems efficient. And from my point of view, I would say we need to be quite concise about what the priorities of the company are. I think I'm out of time now. So I thank you all very much. And I am at your service for any further need.
Sabas, thank you so much. There were a lot of questions because cybersecurity is a very important topic. So thank you so much for joining us.